First, let's start with this case. I'm a dad of 2 young kids, and we often go to a local park to play and enjoy some fresh air. It's a regular thing for us, and we're pretty comfortable with the environment there. The park has a lot of families and other children, so it's usually a safe and relaxed space. We all have our little routines, and I try to be present with my kids during our outings. Last week, we were at the park, and my kids were playing on the swings and slides. I was sitting on one of the benches, keeping an eye on them while checking my phone. Everything seemed normal until I noticed a woman, let's call her Karen, standing nearby with her phone out. She wasn't interacting with anyone, just standing a little ways away and taking pictures of my kids. At first, I didn't think much of it. It's a public park, so I figured she might have been taking pictures of the scenery or something. But as I kept watching, I realized she was clearly focusing on my kids. I was uncomfortable with the situation. My children are young, and while I'm all for capturing memories, I believe it's important to respect other people's privacy, especially when it comes to kids. I walked over to her and politely asked if she could stop taking pictures of my children. I didn't want to escalate things, so I kept my tone calm and respectful. I told her that I wasn't comfortable with her photographing my kids without permission. She looked at me, and instead of understanding where I was coming from, she gave me a bit of a weird look and said she was just capturing memories, and that it was a beautiful moment. I tried to explain that while I understood her sentiment, it was important for me as a parent to make sure my children's privacy was respected. I told her that I didn't want her taking any more pictures of them. She seemed to ignore me and kept snapping photos. It felt like she was intentionally disregarding my request. I asked her again, this time more firmly, to stop. She then said something about how I had no right to tell her what to do in a public space and that I was overreacting. It didn't make sense to me. I wasn't telling her to stop taking pictures of the park or anything, just my kids who were in a private moment of play. I started to feel really uncomfortable. My kids were unaware of what was going on, but I didn't want them to be exposed to this kind of situation. She was still taking pictures, and it was becoming clear that she wasn't going to listen to me. I told her that if she didn't stop, I would have to get the authorities involved. She laughed it off, saying she wasn't doing anything wrong, that she had the right to take photos in a public park, and that she had been doing this for years without issue. At that point, I didn't know what else to do. She was not only ignoring my wishes, but also dismissing my authority as a parent. I felt like I had no choice but to go to the park security and report what was happening. I walked over to the park staff and explained the situation, asking for help to make sure she deleted the photos she had taken of my children. They immediately took action and approached Karen. The staff spoke to her for a while, and I could see her getting defensive. She tried to argue with them, but they were firm in explaining that she needed to respect my request and delete the photos. After some back and forth, she finally agreed to delete the pictures and leave the area. She even tried to give me an attitude about it, saying I was overreacting and that she wasn't doing anything wrong, but at least the situation was resolved. My kids didn't really understand what had happened, and I didn't want to scare them, so I tried to keep things calm. I just explained that sometimes people don't always understand boundaries and that it's important to stand up for ourselves. Since then, I've been feeling conflicted. On one hand, I know I did the right thing by standing up for my kids and making sure their privacy was respected. But on the other hand, I wonder if I could have handled it differently. Maybe I could have been less confrontational, or maybe I should have just let it go, since it was a public place. So, am I in the wrong for asking her to delete the pictures and for involving the authorities when she refused to respect my wishes? Let's start judging. You're not in the wrong. You were just protecting your kids, and she was clearly being disrespectful by ignoring your request. She had no business taking pictures of your children without permission. You gave her multiple chances to stop before involving the authorities, and she didn't listen. She was trying to take advantage of the public space, but you had every right to stand up for your family. You're not in the wrong. You were completely in the right here. Your children's privacy comes first, and you asked politely and reasonably for her to stop. She ignored you multiple times, and when that didn't work, you escalated the situation by involving the authorities. She was being entitled and dismissive of your boundaries, so you did what any parent should do to protect their kids. She didn't have the right to take photos of your children without permission, and I'm glad you stood up for them. Next up, I've been living in my house for a few years now, and things have generally been pretty peaceful with my neighbors. There's one woman, let's call her Karen, who I've had some issues with in the past. She's the type who thinks that because she's been around for a while, she can do whatever she wants. She's also one of those people who likes to involve herself in everything, whether or not she's invited. Last weekend, I decided to throw a backyard barbecue. It wasn't anything extravagant, just a few friends and family, some burgers on the grill, and drinks by the pool. We were all having a great time, enjoying the weather, when out of nowhere Karen showed up. I hadn't invited her, and I had no idea she was planning to show up. She just walked right through the gate to my backyard and started acting like she was part of the party. She went straight to the pool, not even bothering to say hi or anything, and started getting ready to swim. I went over to her and told her that the BQ was for invited guests only and that she wasn't welcome. I said she needed to leave because this was a private gathering and she hadn't been invited. She immediately got defensive and started arguing with me. She said that she was part of the neighborhood and that everyone should be able to swim in the pool. She didn't care that it was my private property. In her mind, she had a right to be there. She even claimed that I was being rude by asking her to leave and that I should be more welcoming to people in the neighborhood. At this point, I was getting frustrated. I explained to her again that this was a private event and I couldn't just let anyone in. But she wasn't having it. She started raising her voice, saying that I was being exclusive and that it wasn't right to have a private event in a community like ours. She kept repeating that the pool was for everyone and that she had every right to use it. I told her again that it wasn't her place to decide who could swim in my pool, and that she needed to leave. Karen didn't take it well at all. She started getting really upset, accusing me of being unfriendly and inconsiderate. She said I was ruining the community vibe by not letting her enjoy my pool. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. At this point, she wasn't even making sense. After a few minutes of arguing, Karen finally left the backyard, but she was very unhappy. As she walked out, she was muttering about how I was selfish and how she would make sure the other neighbors knew what had happened. I didn't think much of it at the time. I went back to the BQ, trying to shake off the tension. Later that evening, I heard from a couple of other neighbors that Karen had been telling everyone in the neighborhood about what had happened. She was making a huge deal about how I kicked her out of my party and how I wouldn't let her use the pool, even though she was a neighbor. She painted me out to be some kind of villain for not letting her swim in my pool. Some of my other neighbors started calling me to ask what happened. They said that Karen had been going on about how she'd never been treated like that in the neighborhood and how I owed her an apology. They even suggested that maybe I had overreacted and should have just let her join the BQ. But to me, this wasn't about letting her join the party. It was about the fact that she showed up uninvited, acted like she had the right to be there, and tried to use my private pool without permission. Now, I'm not sure if I overreacted or if Karen was truly in the wrong. I feel like I did the right thing by asking her to leave and respecting my boundaries. But with all the gossip going around, I'm starting to wonder if I could have handled the situation better. Maybe I could have been more diplomatic instead of getting into a heated exchange. Still, I don't think she should have been there in the first place. So, am I in the wrong for asking my neighbor to leave when she showed up uninvited and tried to use my pool? Let's start judging. You're not in the wrong. You did the right thing. Karen has no right to just show up uninvited and expect to be able to use your private property. It doesn't matter if she's a neighbor. Boundaries are boundaries. You were polite enough by asking her to leave, and she's the one who escalated things by making a scene. Don't let her guilt trip you for doing the right thing. You're not in the wrong. She was out of line. She had no invitation, and she had no right to just walk into your backyard like that. If she had been a real neighbor, she would have respected your space and your boundaries. You were just doing what you should have, and if she's going around spreading lies, it's on her, not you. Keep your boundaries strong. You're not in the wrong. If she wanted to swim in the pool, she should have asked for an invitation, or at least checked if it was okay. The fact that she just showed up and acted like she could do whatever she wanted is completely inappropriate. You weren't rude, you just stood your ground. She's trying to play the victim now, but it's her own fault for being entitled. Next up, I had been planning my private event for weeks. It was an invitation-only event that I wanted to be special, with a small group of close friends, colleagues, and people I trust. It wasn't a public gathering, and I'd gone to great lengths to ensure the guest list was strictly limited. This wasn't just any regular event. It was a celebration to mark a milestone in my life, and I wanted it to be intimate and personal. The venue was perfect, a small but classy space that offered just the right amount of privacy for everyone to enjoy. I had a catered menu, some music lined up, and a few surprises to keep things interesting. Everything was set, and I was looking forward to a great night. That's when the problems started. About an hour before the event was supposed to start, I got a call from a woman I knew. Let's call her Karen. I had met her a few times through work-related events, but I wouldn't consider her a close friend. She wasn't on my guest list, and I hadn't invited her to this particular event. We weren't exactly on bad terms, but we weren't exactly friends either. She had a way of pushing her way into situations, making everything about her. I was hoping she wouldn't show up uninvited, but it seems like she had other plans. She called me, saying that she wanted to come by. I told her it was a private event and that I had a very limited guest list. I tried to make it clear that it wasn't the kind of event where extra people could just show up. I politely told her that I couldn't accommodate her this time. She didn't take that well, but I thought that would be the end of it. Not even an hour later, as I was greeting some of the guests who had arrived, I looked out the window and saw Karen standing at the door. She wasn't just standing there waiting, she was banging on the door, demanding that someone let her in. I immediately felt a sense of unease. This wasn't the kind of event where unexpected guests could just walk in. I went to the door to see what was going on. When I opened the door, Karen started right away with her usual attitude. She didn't care that I had told her the event was private or that she wasn't invited. She claimed that she knew important people and that she had connections, which should be enough to let her in. She made it clear that she wasn't going to leave without getting in. I calmly told her that the event was for invited guests only, and that I wasn't able to make an exception. She didn't like that at all. Her tone changed from demanding to outright hostile. She started yelling, saying that I was being rude and that I was making a huge mistake by not letting her in. She said it was an injustice that I wouldn't let someone like her attend an event that could be so beneficial for my career. At this point, I was trying my best to keep my cool. I explained again that it was a private event and I couldn't let her in, regardless of any connections she claimed to have. But she wasn't having it. She started making more of a scene, shouting that I was ungrateful and that I didn't know who I was turning away. The guests who were arriving started to notice the commotion. I could hear them talking, whispering, and looking at what was going on. I started to feel a little embarrassed, but I still stood firm. I told Karen that if she didn't leave, I would have to call security. The moment I said that, she lost it completely. She began yelling even louder, accusing me of trying to ruin her career and saying that I was stealing opportunities from her by not letting her into my event. She was raising her voice so much that it started drawing attention from the people already inside. Some of them even came over to the door to see what was happening. At this point, I could tell it was getting out of hand. Karen wasn't going to back down, and the guests who were watching the scene unfold were starting to look uncomfortable. One of my friends tried to step in and tell Karen to leave, but she just ignored him and kept going off. The more she shouted, the more ridiculous she looked. I could tell that the guests were already starting to make up their minds about her. The situation wasn't just embarrassing, it was getting completely out of control. I had to put a stop to it. I told her again, more firmly this time, that the event was private, and if she didn't leave, I'd be forced to call security. She didn't care. In fact, she said I was making a huge mistake and that I'd regret it. I knew she wasn't going to back down, so I turned around, went inside, and called security. When security arrived, they took care of the situation. They spoke to Karen, tried to reason with her, but she was too far gone. She kept yelling that I was making a huge mistake and that I would regret not letting her in. The whole time, the guests were watching, and some of them were even laughing at how over the top she was being. I honestly didn't expect her to react like this, but I'm glad I stood my ground. Eventually, security escorted Karen off the property. As she was being led away, she was still yelling, saying that I'd ruin my reputation and that she was going to tell everyone how I treated her. But the damage was done. She had already made a fool of herself in front of everyone. She was publicly embarrassed, and the guests who witnessed the scene were left speechless. A few of them later came up to me and told me that they couldn't believe how out of control she'd gotten. One even said that it was pretty clear she wasn't invited, and that I was well within my rights to refuse her entry. Now, looking back on the whole situation, I can't help but wonder if I should have handled it differently. I did what I thought was best in the moment, but I also feel bad that things had to escalate so much. I'm still kind of embarrassed that the scene was so public, but on the other hand, Karen made it impossible for me to let her in. So, am I in the wrong for refusing her entry and not allowing her to cause a scene at my event? Let's start judging. You're not in the wrong. You handled this perfectly. She was completely out of line, and you were well within your rights to refuse her entry. If she had behaved herself, she might have been able to attend future events, but she made a fool of herself. She deserved the embarrassment. You're not in the wrong. She was completely out of line, and you had every right to refuse her entry. She didn't respect the boundaries you set, and she made a scene in front of your guests. If she had just respected your invitation-only rule, none of this would have happened. It's her fault she made a fool of herself, not yours.